Good morning, everyone, and welcome to RaRa's Academy on Fusion Radio. My name's Tim Brown. I'm the Education Coordinator for RaRa. Brian Duff, Whiskey Mike 2 Whiskey, is hosting the Academy through his employer, TruePath Technologies. We thank them for donating the use of their business Zoom account for our workshop. Steve Verzulli will be your presenter today on Fusion Radio. Today is part 3 of our series on digital radios. The D-Star and DMR sessions were recorded and are available at RaRa on their website at rochesterham.org. This session is being recorded also and will probably be available next week on our website. The previous presenters, Mike, KC2NM, and Rich, K2AXP, are also online here. So maybe after the session, if you got questions on their technology, you can field it to them, but wait till the end for that. So with that, those preliminaries, I'm going to turn it over to Steve, our presenter, and thank you very much, Steve, for all the effort you put in and all the other presenters put in this wonderful series on digital communication. Steve, it's on your.
Okay, very good, Tim. Thank you very much, and hope to build upon what Mike and Rich have done. I am going to turn off my video to conserve bandwidth here, and I'll go directly to the screen sharing. Yeah, this is the Rochester Amateur Radio Association website, and this is the invitation to the presentation today. Thank you for being here. I know you could be at the Hamvention QSO party, or John Crook. John Crook is the Yaesu National Sales Manager. He's holding a, yesterday and today, he's holding a Yaesu Cyber Expo. Lots of good information. I sat in a few sessions yesterday, and I will be sitting in on a couple of sessions this afternoon. I want to thank several people here: Brian, K2AS, Bill, N9RAM, Mike, KC2NM, Rich, K2AXP, Brian, WM2W, Tim, of course, WB2PAY, and Jeff, the repeater trustee, N2MKT for the Drumlin's group repeaters. Okay, what is Fusion? This is an outline. I'm going to go through these. There's lots of material to cover. Some of these topics, such as hotspots, can be, you know, their own presentation, their own 20 or 25 slide PowerPoint presentation by themselves. But I'll start from the 10,000-foot level and in some cases dive in. I'm not an expert. I learned from other experts, you know, that are on the Fusion nets. I read the manuals. I go online. There's a lot of good videos from YouTube. I will get to those and highlight those. I won't cover any theory really, but there is a lot of information, and I'll highlight some of the white papers that Yaesu has. Okay, a little bit about me. As a preteen and a teenager, I enjoyed shortwave listening. You can see the Hammerland HQ-145 on the left. My father was an engineer, and I had an uncle that was an engineer, and they got me started designing and building circuits at a very young age. And before I became a ham, and I was first licensed in 1968, freshman in high school. The high school had a radio club, and that's how I got interested. I have done all the digital modes, some more than others. And to me, some were more challenging to learn. And in some, the learning curve was pretty steep. You've seen the, if you haven't seen the presentation on D-Star and DMR, you should go back to the RaRa Academy website and watch those. But I've asked the question, you know, which one is best? Which one should I use? Well, to me, that's similar to a question when somebody asks me, what computer should I buy? I always answer that with a question, you know, what do you want to do with it? And it's sort of like the same thing with ham digital. And digital, we're talking mainly the DMR, D-Star, and Fusion, and, you know, not the digital that you see on the HF bands, FT8 and the PSK31 and all those. Well, the same thing is, what do you want to do with digital on ham radio? You know, there are some barriers to get in. Price, I know price is very important for some people. And there are advantages and disadvantages to each one of those, and I'll talk about those, but it's from my experience. To me, Fusion has really no learning curve. If you want to use Fusion on the, for simplex or for operation through the repeater, there's really nothing that you have to do to set up special in your radio. No special programming, no registration or anything like that. Fusion is the newest of the digital modes. Like D-Star, it was designed by hams for hams, and one of they have several goals. One of them being amateur friendly. D-Star was designed by hams for hams. It's a much older technology. And DMR, as you saw, was a commercial that was adapted to ham radio. So Fusion had a couple of goals. One of them was high quality digital voice. And this goes back to 2013. Yaesu released several white papers, and I will have a link, a reference for that. And there's a lot of information in there as to why they did what they did. But what I really like is especially mobile. There's no static, there's no picket fencing, no bacon frying, no fading in and out, some of those terms. They use the latest Ambi Plus 2 vocoder, which is the voice decoder and encoder from DVSI. And I think it's simple, ease of use, and yet it's versatile and flexible. Lots of functionality is built in. But having all that functionality built in may be confusing sometimes. And I'll try and explain that as best I can. And of course, if there's any questions, raise them. And I can't see the chat window, but Tim will alert me if there is something in there. And to me also, it's about making a connection, having a conversation. And if you're a tech, you can talk all over the world via the internet with the digital modes. And I mentioned there's no need to get an ID or register to use a repeater or even a hotspot with Fusion. Every Fusion radio that comes, when you first power it up, it has you enter in your call sign. And a lot of people do that. They enter their call sign. I believe there's 10 spaces to do that. And they can enter their call sign and then have maybe a dash Bob for their name or a dash 100D for their radio, something like that. There are several topics that I'm going to cover here. Repeaters, Yaesu made the repeaters very cheap, and even the first beta ones were free to clubs that wanted to try them out, and they had good upgrade programs. They chose FDMA, and I've got some definitions later, but frequency domain multiple access, and Yaesu says it's more friendly than the time domain multiple access that you saw with that DMR uses with the 2 time slots. And one of the things I found is with my DMR radios, my HTs, I wanted to use it in the car and I needed an amplifier to get more than 5 watts out, but it required a special amplifier for TDMA. Whereas FDMA, I can use my FM amplifier. And one of the things that Fusion, where the Fusion comes from with Yaesu Digital Fusion or System Fusion is, and this is unique to the digital modes, is that it joins analog and digital, and they have something called AMS, which is automatic mode select. You're not leaving behind the FM operators. The digitals can all be, or the repeaters can all be set up in this AMS mode, and I'll explain a little bit more about how that works, and I have a video showing that as well. It's the only of the digital modes that is backward compatible to FM. And they also chose a modulation scheme of C4 FM. And that's the same as P25, but they're not compatible. In fact, none of these digital modes are compatible. C4 FM is used in public safety. And I see questions, and I get questions once in a while. I got a Fusion radio, it's C4 FM, can I talk to P25? Well, unfortunately, no, you can't, even though it's C4 FM, which, is a modulation scheme, which impresses the information on a radio wave. They have a protocol that is not compatible with P25. Won't talk about programming, but programming the Yaesu radios is fairly easy. You can do it from the front panel or a keypad. And there's software. The Yaesu makes software for the radios, ADMS, which is free. RT Systems has some amateur-friendly programming software as well, but it's not free. But it does allow downloads from other sources. And I know there's Chirp and other freeware and shareware software available. I use Chirp myself to program some of the Yaesu analog and Bofeng radios. However, I'll caution here, Yaesu does not recommend using Chirp, and it will void the warranty if anything happens to your radio. What happens is that there's something in these radios called the DPID, the Digital Personal ID. It's used for each radio has its own unique ID. And sometimes when using Chirp, I know that on the website you can program your FT70 with Chirp, but sometimes something happens and then the radio hard coding of that ID gets corrupted and then your radio won't work in digital mode anymore. So you've unfortunately voided your warranty there. In this slide, I'm covering quickly the four modes. FM is not shown, and this is kind of unique to Fusion. First of all, there's the DN mode, which is the digital narrow mode. All these use 12.5 kilohertz of bandwidth. There's forward error correction in the DN mode. You can see that half of that bandwidth is used for the error correction. DN mode is used on WireX systems and hotspots. That's recommended. And with the forward error correction, some people say you get more distance out of it than you normally would with FM or some of the other modes. The VW, the one in the middle here, digital voice for voice wide, that's the best quality, but there is no error correction there. And then finally, the data, digital wide mode uses all the available bandwidth for sending, and you can send pictures, data, and messages. In this slide, I've taken these terms and definitions. I'm not going to really go into too much detail here, but they're here. They're taken from one of the Yaesu manuals. I do want to point out down at the bottom here the room. It's sort of typical with Yaesu Fusion to call reflectors, if you will, on the internet rooms. D-Star tends to call them reflectors. DMR calls them talk groups, but they're really the same thing. On this slide, continuation of some more definitions, again from Yaesu. And one of the things here that I wanted to point out is on the WireX, you can have a linked repeater. Unlike DMR and D-Star, you don't need an internet connection at the repeater site. I know in some cases that can be tough to have an internet connection there, but you can connect to the WireX network via RF link. The XRX Club president there, Brian, K2AS, often does that from his home location in Ontario. He connects via RF to the repeater down in Canadice. I've heard reflectors, rooms, talk groups also being referred to as internet chat rooms. You can probably think of it in those terms. On the Fusion product line, got this picture out of a QST magazine and put together this table here. The important thing, several important things to know about this, and this hopefully will help you choose a radio, because I see it often. Someone will buy a radio like the FT70D. It's the entry point for Fusion. It's an HT. It's dual band, but you can't do the PDN mode. And I'll talk about what PDN or portable digital node is later. So they buy the radio, they spend the money, and they want to do more, and they can't do it. So this kind of highlights what you can and can't do. I'd recommend going to the Yaesu website to find out more information about this information on the radios. FTM 100, just heard last week that has been discontinued. That's been a very popular radio. People use it in their mobiles, home-based stations, and for setting up wires X and PDN nodes. There's several ways to communicate. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention on the radios, Yaesu offers a 3-year warranty on them. I know some of the other radios, I have used ICOM, Kenwood, Chinese, TYT, Hytera. All these radios have a shorter warranty period. So I know these are more expensive than your DMR radios that are available from China. If cost is your only consideration, then the DMR might be the way to go. But one thing I did notice, this FT70D is 175. It's on sale now because of specials for Hamvention. On the previous slide, you saw that I had used a ID31 from Icon for D-Star. When I bought that, it was pretty close to $400. And I see that I checked the price a couple days ago from Ham Radio Outlet, and it was 154. So I think D-Star radios and Fusion radios are pretty close. Ways to communicate. Simplex, very easy to do. Yaesu's been promoting something called a digital national calling frequency of 145.5625 megahertz. You can use that for simplex. Repeaters, I'll show on the next slide, I'll show there's lots of Fusion repeaters in the area, and there's 11 within 50 miles of Rochester. Another way to communicate is with wires X with an HRI 200 box. That was one of the first ways to communicate over the internet. But since then, in the past year or two, Yaesu's come out with something called a PDN, and I've heard it referred to as personal digital node or portable digital node. You don't need the HRI 200 box, which is expensive. It's $125. So you just use your radio, some cables, and your computer to communicate.
Steve.
And then, yes.
Yeah, one person wanted a little bit more elaboration what PDN mode was or what it entailed. Will you be covering that?
Yes, I will. You know, the 5 ways, the last one I have here is hotspots. And one of the things that I want to highlight here is that hotspots have something called YSF reflectors. YSF, you know, you can say, well, it stands for Yaesu System Fusion, but YSF reflectors have nothing to do with Yaesu. Not connected at all. One point that's confusing. So to operate again, once again, I'll say to operate simplex and repeaters, you do not need registration at all to do that. Okay, here's something that I pulled from Repeater Book a couple of days ago. And I just saw from RaRa, they've updated the repeater list. And if I go to note number 8, there's only one repeater listed for Fusion. And I wanted to highlight, and this is the repeater here, the W2BZX repeater, which is, I believe, part of the Rochester Repeater Association group. But there are more repeaters. Some of these have wires X. Some of them are multi-mode. When I say multi-mode, they have a board connected to them that allows them to do other digital modes other than Fusion. But they are either Fusion repeaters, and they started out with the DR1 and then the DR1X, and now the latest is the DR2X. So this DR1X is a factory refurbished, and those were pretty cheap. Those were $400. So I had to buy one of those, and I just upgraded it to DR2X. That was also, they had a special on that. That was $600. So all these repeaters here, and I see this one here is listed twice. So I counted 11, there may be 10. But you can see the legend here. And this is 50 miles. And there's one repeater that I've used that's also a Fusion. It's in AMS mode. It's in Batavia, and I can get into it digital. I have trouble getting into it to analog from my location in Walworth. But Walworth to Batavia on this repeater is possible with digital. And I had a conversation QSO with N2OA Dave one night, and we went through the modes. FM was very scratchy. I couldn't read him. He couldn't read me. We switched over to digital narrow, and it was crystal clear. So right. That's one of the advantages. Yes.
All right, Steve. Paul Conaway has a question.
Okay. Paul, go ahead.
Do any of those radios have a built-in sound card?
No, they do not. You mean for connecting like a TNC or bringing them out?
Yeah, if one wanted to use FL Digi or something like that on conventional FM with them.
No, there's no sound card in the radio, but there's a DIN connector on the back, and with the FTM 100 and the FTM 400, and very soon to be released, the FTM 300, there's a 10-pin DIN connector, and they bring out all the connections in there, the audio, cause, and things, so that you can hook it up to digital. You can also hook it up and make yourself a APRS, hook it into a TNC or a Raspberry Pi with Direwolf and do APRS things, but there's no sound card into
Okay,
the
thanks.
radios. Okay.
Right. Got a comment that came from Parth Singh, W2IVV, that the W2RIT is also System Fusion enabled. You might want to add that to your list.
W2RIT. Okay. Yeah, a repeater book. I will mention though that it's what's that saying? Your mileage will vary. It depends upon user input. So in this next slide here, I've kind of listed the number of repeaters that I found. I just did a search on repeater book a couple of days ago and wanted to show, okay, what repeaters are, how many repeaters there are in the US and D-Star, DMR, Fusion, Wires X, and P25. I did this a while ago. In August of 17, I went through and got a list of the repeaters. In September of 2018, I got a list. Even though I don't have those numbers here, I can make those available. What it shows is that the number of Fusion repeaters has gone up quite a bit from 2017. In 2017, it was 1,165. What I was surprised to see is that the number of D-Star repeaters has gone down. In 2017, it was 1143. In 2018, 1160. And just a few days ago was 1045. But again, take this with a grain of salt, because this is all user input. And I found on repeater books, some repeaters aren't even on the air anymore, and there's repeaters on the air that are not listed there. Okay, here's a couple typical repeater setups. On the left here is a UHF, and it's set up for digital only. It's a DR2 repeater shown here. Over here, where I'm pointing to, that's the HRI 200 box. So it's running Wires X. There's a computer down here, and it's dedicated just to Wires X. And you can show there's a computer screen showing the Wires X software. Over here on the right is a VHF repeater. It's one of the Drumlin's repeaters, and it's a multi-mode repeater. It operates on that frequency there, 146.745. It uses, Jeff has this set up for with an SCOM controller, and he also has All-Star on it. And the way it switches is there's a Motorola PL, private line board, that tells the repeater to be in either digital or analog mode, depending upon the signal being received. Over here, the Yaesu Fusion, I don't have any special controller. There's a controller built in. There's power supply built in. You can run it off a battery in emergency situations. There's a touch screen to set it all up. There's even a speaker where you can hear the output of the repeater. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a minute and go to a page here.
While you're doing that, I'll make a comment, everybody. If you're not reading your chat area, Mike made a comment that the 991A is C4 FM and has a sound card built in response to Paul Conway's question about sound cards. So the 991A, he believes, has that's a all band radio, and it does have a sound card installed.
Yes, that's the only Fusion radio that I don't have, and my comment on that is I don't know much about the radio, but it has a 6-pin DIN connector versus the 10-pin DIN connector that 100 and 400 has. So you can only, and you can connect it to an HRI 200 box, but it won't do digital. It will only do analog wires X because of that, well, call it limitation or whatever. Okay.
All right. Thanks. Thanks,
All
Mike.
right. This is a recording that I made. This is K2S and I on the XRX repeater, showing the 3 AMS modes.
Everything's working okay so far. K1CNF from K2AS.
Yep, it's working good. It's QuickTime on the Mac. Guess it's giving me a display that is recording. Hopefully, I'm gonna move this forward a little bit. I didn't edit it, but this is FM mode. I don't do anything. You can see the little bar over the FM. That means it's in AMS, automatic mode select mode. So Brian is going to manually change his radio from FM to DN to voice wide and then back to FM again, and you can hear the quality.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I was disappointed as well with the continuing of the FTM 100. I have one here that I use for my node, and I had thought about getting another one that I could use so that I could.
I'll stop it here a minute. You can see that the information that's coming across on my radio is Brian's call sign. He's got a -400H for his radio that he's using, and he has GPS built in. This radio has GPS built into it, and we are 7.9 miles from each other. Again, it's in DN mode with the bar flashing over the top, so my radio is automatically switching depending upon the signal that's coming in.
My personal digital node available while monitoring other repeaters and FM. But I have a feeling they're going to announce.
All right, I'll stop it here. I'll advance it a bit. I see you're 7.9 miles from me. That's coming out on the. Advance it a little bit more here. EDN and also some wires X activities, but and you can see the LEDs on the screen. Back to you for transmission and VW voice wide.
Okay, very good. K1CNF from K2AS. Yes, I got you at the same thing, 7.9 miles. And I think my understanding is that if in voice wide, that you don't get the GPS information and the distance. But I haven't used voice wide that often, so you can confirm whether or not that's true, or I will see when you transmit. Yeah, I suppose that's possible with the FTM 100. They didn't really say. I would expect that they had something planned for Dayton this year.
Right. Let's stop that, and then Brian will go back to FM mode here, regular FM, and you can hear the difference.
Very good, Steve. Yeah, the audio was excellent there. Definitely a noticeable difference. Very, very clean, and a good fidelity. And yeah, it's as I said, I haven't used it that often, but it certainly did sound nice there for sure.
Okay, I'll stop that, close that. Hopefully go back to the presentation. Wires X with the HRI 200. Like I said, these are the HRI 200 is still available. It's $125. This goes back to a Yaesu controlled server, and you use the HRI 200 as a room with a room and as a node, goes over the internet. It stands for Wide Coverage Internet Repeater Enhancement System. Even though you start with a server in Japan, when you connect to another Wires X node or Wires X station or room, once that communication is established, it doesn't go through the server, and it's then peer-to-peer. I had mentioned before you didn't need to sign up or to get any kind of special registration to operate simplex or through a repeater. But to operate the Wires X node, you do need to register with Yaesu.
Paul had a question on Wires X.
Okay, go ahead, Paul.
You're probably just getting into it, but I'm wondering what it is. You've mentioned it a few times. Is it a part of Fusion or an add-on or what?
I guess you could say it's maybe an enhancement to Fusion. It allows connection over the internet. It's a VoIP type situation where you communicate with other stations over the internet.
So if you don't want to use Echolink, you can use this.
Well, Echolink is also a voice over IP system, but it's analog only, separate system. I also run 4 All-Star nodes. That's a VoIP system as well, but it's analog. What's the best voice quality for a VoIP? I would say that it's All-Star, because they use a good codec. It's got full bandwidth, with possibly Fusion being second for voice quality. But I'll go into that a little bit more and maybe answer specific questions with the HRI 200. But what I'm showing here now is the web page for inputting your registration. If you're using an HRI 200 box, you have to register it. The HRI 200 hardware box is not being used so much anymore because they've come out with this PDN or portable digital node. You still have to register the radio in PDN, and you have to fill this out, and you have to, each radio has to have its own unique registration. I have 4 registrations, one for my HRI 200 box, and the other 3 are for specific radios for use with the PDN mode. One of the things okay, yes.
Yeah, Ed Lansky's got a question about the Japan server. All right, he said that in a disaster, Japan took down the Wires X server. Would hams in the U.S. still be able to use Wires X?
It depends upon that central server first established a connection, and I know that it's pretty robust and it's been up. But if there is a disaster, you're not going to be able to communicate. And I'll show that web page there.
Thank you.
On this web page here, this is Yaesu. Up here, there's a couple of white papers that you can download for more information, and this gets into the technical specifics of the protocol and why they chose it. But I wanted to mention that each of these radios, when you buy it, it comes with a paper manual. It's an operating manual. But I wanted to point out that there's a lot of other manuals that are available, and some people didn't know this. But for this radio here, the FT3, their newest handheld, there's a Wires X portable digital node function instruction manual. There's the operating manual that comes with the radio. There's also a instruction manual for operating Wires X. There's an advanced manual. Some of these are, 100 pages or more. And there's also an instruction manual on the APRS, operating APRS with the radio. And even another separate manual for the operating GM, which is group mode, which I will talk about later. So there's lots of information here. It can be overwhelming. Previously, they hid this, the Wires X manual. You actually had to go to the Wires X box in order to get the manual for how to operate your radio. But I see now they've got the web page where if you go right to the, this portable digital node and this Wires X instruction, now you can go to the radio, go to the files, and all the manuals are there. So it took a little bit of digging to get all the manuals, but here they are. A lot of information, and yeah, I know it can be overwhelming at times. The question on the server in Japan, and the other digital modes also use servers. Brandmeister that Rich talked about uses servers all over the world. You have to connect to 3101. There's 3102, etc. So if I'm connected to the one in the U.S., the 3101, and there's a couple in the U.S., and that goes down, I will not be able to communicate over the internet with DMR if that server goes down. So here's a list on the Yaesu website. Everybody that registers, they get a node ID and they get a room ID. The room ID that you get is 10,000 higher then the node ID. And if you see somebody on the list here, you can connect to their room ID or node ID. One of the points I want to make, and I'll emphasize this slowly, is that with the personal digital mode, you do get a room number, but it doesn't mean anything. You don't actually get a room. And I'll cover what you can do with that room if you have an HRI 200 box. So once again, the HRI 200 box will give you a room ID that you can actually do something with. You can put files up there, pictures, voice files. People can connect to that room, and I'll show you some of the rooms on the internet. But with the PDN, portable or personal digital node, you get a room ID, but you have no room. I hope I make that clear enough. I probably can't say it over enough here. You get one of the things with WiresX over the internet, you get very clear communications. And as somebody brought up, yeah, it is like Echolink All-Star, but there's more features being digital. And I'm not sure if I had talked about this or not, but you don't need an internet connection at your repeater site for WiresX to operate. Brian has operated an RF link from his home to the XRX repeater many times. Okay, here's a screen from my repeater, and it shows it's connected to this room in the southern tier. This is Bill, N9RIM, in his room, and his 5-digit room number is 21424. And when I took this screenshot, there were 13 nodes or other people connected to the room. I won't go into too much detail because there is a whole separate manual on this for the WiresX, but it shows that the last person to transmit here was John, KC2EQ. He was using, it even identifies because the unique ID in the radio, he was using an FT3D, and it shows how far he is from me. Over here in this window is a bookmark that I've had for a lot of my favorite rooms on WiresX. You've got the WiresX user IDs, and down here it's covered up with a screenshot, but the actual room IDs. And you can go up here and sort these by clicking on the top of the columns with the how many people. This shows how many people are in the. This is the America Link room, which is, I said, probably the busiest. The room number, if you want to go to it, you'd punch in 21080 on your radio. There's 164 people connected to it. And there's more information here as well. Let me go back to browser screen here and go back to this list. This has lots of information, and you can use your browser to search. If you want to find a call sign there, you can do a find. And I want to see this person here. Okay, what does he have? He's got 4 listings here. There's one instance, and this is my node ID and room ID for my WiresX box. Go down a little bit more, and you can see the repeater and another PDN node that I have set up. What is not being shown here for some reason is the comments column. Oh, that's in the active ID list. Sorry about that. If you go, that was the whole list. If you pull up the active ID list, I'll just talk about it. It shows, it's got information as to what country it's in, comments. It's not showing for some reason, but you can go to the, I got the link on the end of the presentation. You can go there. It'll show the frequencies that the node is operating on. On the next slide, I've got a picture of my digital node set on this frequency here. As I said, the WiresX box is connected to the repeater, but I can still operate WiresX with this personal digital node. The radios that there's several radios that are capable. Goes back to my other slide that which ones can do the handheld ones, the FT2, FT3, and the mobiles, the FT100 and 400, and soon the 300. Can all be operated as a personal digital node. What do you need for PDN? Well, you need a radio, you need a computer, and you need some cables. Unfortunately, it won't work on Linux. I know some people have got it working on a Mac with a Windows emulator. And there's a certain way you turn on the radio. Like I can switch the radio between the Wires X mode and normal mode by holding down the DX and GM buttons while I power it on. Or I can do that again, and we'll go back to the previous setup. That's all in the manual as well. So as I mentioned, you don't need the HRI 200 hardware. Use your own radio. Going back to the HRI 200 hardware, in addition to the computer, the radio, the HRI 200, you also needed a second radio to communicate with the radio that was connected to the HRI 200. You don't need that anymore with PDN. So you use your radio that you have, you connect it to the computer with a USB cable and an audio cable. You can go USB cable only if you want to do digital mode. If you want to do mix mode or include analog, then you need an audio cable. And you can do it with the Windows 7, 10, PC, or tablet. And there's no special internet setup. I didn't touch on it, but with the HRI 200, it was difficult because it needed a static IP address on your network. It also needed 6 ports to be opened or port forwarded. And that was problematic, especially taking it on the road or away from home. If you used a hotspot, you had to open up ports. If you were a hotel or whatever, try getting them to open up ports on their network to operate it. So with the PDN, you don't need any special internet setup. And you can operate more than one PDN from your home location. At times I've operated three different PDNs. You can't operate 2 on the same PC, so each one requires a special, its own unique PC. And I mentioned this, you can't host your own room. Okay, these may be confusing. These are out of the Yaesu manuals, but I wanted to point out the differences between the in PDN you have the portable digital node. You have a PDN digital node station, and you have a Wires X. They call it Wires X or HRI. I wish they wouldn't do that because then it gets confused with that Wires X HRI 200 box. But in this mode here, in the digital mode, you can communicate from one radio into another radio that's connected by cables, goes over the internet, and is shown here. You can also connect into direct mode and use the radio speaker and microphone to connect. You don't need this remote radio down here. And in the HRI mode, it's pretty much the same thing, but in the HRI mode, you can do mix mode, analog and digital. With the previous setup here, the PDN, you can only do digital. And I'll show a site. N9RAM Bill has a Facebook webpage, and he has documents on there that go into much more detail than these pictures do. So here's the setup. If I have one of my HTs here, and there's actually 2 streams that go out. So your computer is running the Wires X software. You have the cable set up here. This cable, the USB cable, handles the digital stream, and the audio cables handle the analog stream. And I'll just mention here, what gets people into trouble sometimes is that they plug the USB cable into their computer before they install the driver. And then the Windows says, oh, I recognize that, and installs a driver. Well, it's the wrong driver. So then you have to uninstall that and go back and redo it again. So the recommendation is to set your radio to low power, and the direct or hotspot mode, again, direct is punching some keys on the radio to use the speaker or microphone, or set the radio up in a hotspot mode so that you can communicate to this radio with another radio, walk around your house or neighborhood to do that. And this one is showing that it's digital only. It has this SCU19 cable, and this causes some confusion also because the SCU19 comes with the mobile radios. The cable that comes with the FT3 and the FT2 is only for updating the firmware. A lot of people have plugged that cable, it's USB, plugged into their laptop and say, I can't get PDN to work. Well, you're using the cable that came with the radio. It's only for updating the firmware. You have to either get your cable from your mobile radio or buy this SCU39 cable kit, which comes with both the USB cable and the audio cables that I showed on the previous screen. Okay, how to get started. Here's some radios that you can use for PDN on some Windows systems. If you install the WiresX software, it won't run if your Windows PC is maybe a tablet and it doesn't have a sound card, or if the audio cables aren't installed, you want to run digital only. In that case, I plugged a USB sound card into one of my PCs that didn't have a sound card and everything worked fine. In another one, I didn't use the audio cables and the WiresX software came up with an error. So I just plugged a headset into the jack, and what that does is the sound card then tells Windows, hey, something's plugged in and I can work. These 12 steps here, if you go through it one by one and the manuals explain it, number 7, N9RIM, Bill has put together a good document that gives more details. There's more details in the manual. This is another good website here, hamoperator.com, help in setting up the PC. It's not hard, but you do have to do some reading to go through it. Okay, hotspots. I want to touch upon hotspots because there were a lot of questions related to hotspots. There's a lot of choices out there. My wife has said in the past, well, why do you need so many hotspots? And there's a reason for that. This is the latest OpenSpot 3. Here's a picture of, I stole off a Rich's slide on DMR of a Raspberry Pi Zero and one of the Zoom boards here, and it's running PiStar. PiStar is very popular and it's easy to set up and run. I've seen, this hotspot OpenSpot here is fairly expensive. I have the 1, 2, and now the 3. There's quite a few features between each model, and you can buy this fairly cheap from China, less than $100. HRO has the Zoom Spot, the official one, for about $100. You can get something called a rugged spot already set up for you with your call sign, your Wi-Fi network, and everything installed for about $250, $260 or something like that.
Yeah, Steve, going back to WiresX, Ed Lanke had a question about multiple sound cards. Ed, can you unmute and rephrase that?
If your computer is equipped with multiple sound cards, and let's say, for example, some of them are USB sound cards, and that's the sound card you want to use for WiresX, as opposed to possibly an internal sound card in the computer, which you may be using for music or something else. I have not been able to find a way to get WiresX to use the sound card I want to use. I want it to use. It always seems to go to the default sound card. Is there a way to tell WiresX which sound interface you want it to use?
I don't know. I have played with that, and I've got one computer with 2 sound cards on it, and I also use an external sound card for my HF digital. All I can say is that there is some help on hamoperator.com website for that. I've had it working once with multiple sound cards. I had to go through and set things up, and then WiresX had to set it up, and it worked for a while, and then Microsoft came along with an update, and after that, nothing worked again. So, and then I had to set it up, and then they come through with another update and screw things up. So what I've done with my PDN and my hardware HRI 200 setups there is I've gone to special, or not special, but unique PCs. In the case of the WiresX, it's a fanless PC, single board computer that I put in a case, and that's dedicated. And I've never had, that's been up and running for months with no problems. It's running Windows 7, and I know Windows 7 isn't supported anymore, but Ham Operator talks about how you can keep that Windows 7 going with your WiresX. So unfortunately, I don't really have an answer for you. it comes down to a lot between windows. You can call. One of the nice things about Yaesu, they're in California, and I've had some questions and I've called them up, and you know, they've helped me with some of my issues. Or you can, you know, they have an official Facebook page. You can post your issue there. Sorry, I can't really answer your question. I know it's a difficult one. And that's one of the advantages, I guess, of maybe Yaesu Fusion. They're the only manufacturer. There could be more manufacturers if they wanted to, but help is readily available. Unlike if I had a problem, you know, I had a problem with my TYT radio, to digress a little bit, and I couldn't get them to respond by email or anything. And finally, I just gave up. But they should be pretty helpful during this time of, you know, everybody's working from home. I know that the registration's taken you know, it usually takes 24 hours. It's taken a few days longer, and they may not be all answering the phone during this time. Okay, does that help a little bit?
Yes, thank you.
Going back to hotspots, they can connect to YSF, not Yaesu System Fusion. The YSF is software developed by somebody in Europe, and he maintains it. There's an FCS network. There's XLX reflectors. I mentioned that Pi-Star is very popular. And I think rather than switch back and forth, because I have some web pages that I want to show, I'll do that at the end, because it's difficult for me to do the switch. You can see here with this hotspot, there's a display on there. I've got several of mine set up with displays. And one of the nice things, and this has been recently here, cross mode. What does cross mode mean? Well, I can take my Fusion radio, I can set up the Pi-Star software, I can go in to the hotspot on Fusion and come out on DMR or P25. And then somebody with a DMR radio can talk into their hotspot, cross mode, and come out on Fusion on my hotspot. So basically, if you had just one digital radio, one of the versions, you can now do cross mode between D-Star, YSF, and P25. I didn't mention D-Star because you can't do that, D-Star cross mode, with the Pi-Star with the Zoom spot. However, you can with the new OpenSpot 3, and that's, you know, it's expensive, but it's got some cool features. It's got an AMBI 3000 chip in there, a vocoder chip. That hardware allows you then to do cross mode to D-Star. So I can take my D-Star radio, talk into my OpenSpot, come out on any other mode, and any other mode coming in will then go to D-Star. I want to mention that these hotspots will not connect to WiresX, separate networks. The WiresX network is Yaesu Fusion. The hotspot networks, YSF, FCS, XLX reflectors, and probably there'll be more, are not Yaesu Fusion. Okay, here's a typical web page for one of my hotspots. I've got them all named, unique host names up here. If you have more than one, you don't want to, well, you can, but it makes it easier if you have unique host names here. Yes, Mike?
So when you're using the cross modes that you describe, if you go into the open spot with a DMR radio and you want to talk to somebody, let's say on Fusion or D-Star, how do you make the connection to a reflector or a room or a talk group? There's no way to do that from the radio. You have to do it from the browser page for that. Is that how you make the connection?
Well, you sort of can. I haven't gone DMR into my hotspot cross mode, but I've used Fusion. The Pi-Star and the open spots will recognize the WiresX control, and I can show that, where you can then change rooms on your hotspot. But the WiresX doesn't recognize, you know, you can do YSF with no problem, but that's a 5-digit ID. The issue comes in if you want to go to a talk group with more than 5 digits in it. That's not going to work. I know that people are looking into that and seeing it. So I always change on the hotspot itself. I bring up the browser, bring up the hotspot webpage, and make the changes there. And
Okay.
I can show a little bit of that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Lots of tips here. My old boss would have a fit, more than 3 bullets on a page, but everybody can see this. They're going to get hard copies of the presentation. So I'll just go through a couple of things that have caught people, with issues and problems here. One of them is if you're going on the road with your Pi-Star hotspot or even your open spot, don't use special characters on your phone's Wi-Fi hotspot. I know somebody that has an iPhone and his SSID had a pound and an exclamation point, special characters other than numbers and letters. The hotspot wouldn't connect to it. The other thing that I don't have on here is why I have so many hotspots. Well, I use one for each mode. You can set up a hotspot and you can scan between each of the 4 modes, but it takes time to scan. And if I'm using that hotspot on Fusion and I want to control it with wires X, I push the button to control it. Well, it's a very short transmission, and the hotspot may have been scanning on the DMR mode or some other mode other than Fusion. And sometimes it takes a while. So I have a hotspot set up for just YSF, and one hotspot for each of the modes. I know that may be overkill for some, but that's the way it goes. You don't want to put an external antenna or amplifier on these hotspots. The hotspot uses a Analog Devices 7021 RF modem chip. It's an inexpensive chip. It's about $2, but it doesn't have very good filtering on it. You're going to have a lot of spurs go out if you amplify it. If you put an external antenna on it, you're going to have a very good mixer. Choose your frequency carefully. Stay away from any repeater, local users and satellite frequencies. There was an issue early on where a lot of people were putting these on as satellite subbands, the frequencies, and they were actually interfering with the people trying to communicate with satellites. So the software will not let you use any of those frequencies. And I know that local codes, across the country or across the world maybe differently for different frequencies. If you have more than one spot, that hotspot, this is important here, have them on different frequencies. I've heard a lot of what they call looping. Somebody will have 2 hotspots, they're on the same frequency, they're set up on the same room or reflector, and they'll get a looping. Well, a lot of the software will now detect that looping and kill it before it goes on, but I've heard it go on for minutes at a time. Unless there's specific questions, I've been burned before with this, with clones and counterfeits. I won't go into it, but if there's any questions, I can certainly answer that. And don't pass DTMF tones over the network. That includes hotspots and the wires F networks. It kind of disrupts things. You can turn those tones off. You can use the tones to, control your hotspot, but mute them going out over the network. I want to say a little bit more since I have a little bit of time here. The BER, bit error rate. Some people say anything more than 2%. I found that 3% is okay. The hotspots, on Fusion, I don't have to adjust the frequency offset, but on DMR, I find I have to, sometimes put in -200 hertz in order to get the BER rate. I have links to somebody that's, how do you set the BER for the lowest? And I have some references to that. Okay, here's a comparison. I mentioned that they're totally separate. Don't confuse them. One of the advantages of Wires X is that you're using one of Yaesu's radios. You can have it set on 5 or 20 watts. I have a cooling fan. I have mine set on 20 watts. You can probably, I've heard people running on 50 watts, but not for very long or unless you have some extensive cooling. A lot of the repeaters run 50 watts with no issues. You get maybe 10 or 20 milliwatts out of the hotspots. Good for around the house and around the neighborhood. The hotspots, I know they're coming out with the dual band ones, but most of the hotspots are in the 440 megahertz, but the Yaesu radios can run either 2 meters or 70 centimeters. Here's where it gets interesting. I mentioned that Wires X is not the same and it can't directly access the these reflectors. But hams have established bridges. You can use your hotspot to bridge into your Wires X network and back and forth. But I've heard some terrible voice quality over the air. There are some groups that do it right. Minwiz is one of them. Texas Nexus is another. Alabama Link is another one that does it very good. Yeah, just enjoy yourself, whether you use Wires X or a hotspot.
Question about the MMDVM modules, bridge for different modes.
Okay.
This is Parth here. I wanted to just ask, like, this is our experience when we were setting up the Pi-Star on the W2RIT repeater. So as far as I remember, when we were doing that, we were able to like turn on the sliders on the software, the Pi-Star software. So anything that we could sort of transmit on another network could go on the like say other modes. I'm just not sure whether that's the exact functionality, whether that is from that perspective. Are we talking about the same thing?
Not sure. I'm going to ask you to repeat your question because I was listening carefully, but I didn't quite understand your question. So could you repeat it, please?
Sure. So you know how you're talking about that all these modes are separate, and then there are some groups that sort of bridge them, and then so that the audio quality is not degraded. So are the MMDVM modules going to help in that process for bridging? Like, that's a short question.
Oh, okay. Let me see. MMDVM is its own board. In fact, Pi-Star is built on MMDVM, the hardware and the software. I do have one of my hotspots is running an MMDVM board. It goes into a data radio, a 3-watt data radio. So basically, I have a hotspot that puts out more than 10 milliwatts. It puts out 3 watts. It's a little difficult to get the modulation and everything set up on it. There's some pots to adjust. But the repeaters that, well, use the Drumlins repeaters as an example. They're set up with either the URDC board from Northwest Digital or the MMDVM board. They do a pretty good job of on a repeater. You're not going to get best quality if it was Wires X. You can also, to extend your question a little bit, if the repeater doesn't have Wires X, I mentioned the RF. You can do that with a hotspot. I did it, locally here to my repeater. I had the wires or the OpenSpot 1, and I had that RF bridge to my repeater, and I had the American Link YSF room connected to it, and it, went out over the repeater, and I can talk in the repeater and do that into the room. So I would just recommend using, like Brian uses his HRI 200, the hardware box, to connect to a repeater, or is a PDN node, which will also connect RF into the repeater if the repeater does not have internet at the site. The MMDVM board is good for a lot of experimenting.
All right.
So the reason this question actually came up in my head was the WTRIT repeater is what we had set up with the Raspberry Pi and MMDVM board and such. In that particular setup, we were able to also receive DMR and also receive, if I'm not wrong, V-Star, and also receive the Yaesu Fusion. I was talking to James Stefano some time ago on text about whether our repeater is Yaesu Fusion enabled, and he said yes, just to confirm what I thought. So I was kind of wondering how that works. Like, I know it works, but I don't know how it works.
Okay, I haven't tried the RIT repeater on Fusion. I've tried it on DMR. In fact, that was one of the questions that I didn't get a chance to ask Jim, because I see from the repeater directory, it listed all the other modes, but it didn't list Fusion. But now I understand that it does have Fusion. One of the things you got to do, and I'll go into etiquette, when you've got a repeater set up with an MMDVM board, you want to key up and hold your, push to talk for a second or two before you start talking, because that, the MMDVM's got to decide, all right, what signal is coming in, and then set itself to that. So
right.
I think it works pretty good. The Drumlins repeaters that are set up with that multi-mode working pretty good, and the Xerox repeater out in Chilai on .825 works fairly good with the. I think that uses the URDC board, which is similar to the MMDVM. That works good
Right.
for multi-mode. Okay, Pat.
Sure.
Right. Steve, got another question about on a hotspot. Are there specific frequencies recommended for Rochester area?
I have not seen any in the Rochester area. I've got a spreadsheet set up with all my frequencies. What I do is before I use a frequency, I go around with my spectrum analyzer, make sure that there's no spurious output from a computer or a LED bulb or something on that frequency. I haven't seen anything, but maybe one of the repeater coordinators could comment on that. I've seen things from other parts of the country, Illinois, Indiana, the Yellow River Digital Group. They have recommendations for hotspot frequencies, but I'm not aware of anything in Rochester. Just stay away from the satellite bands. Unless somebody in the audience has more information on that, I'd be open to the frequencies.
There were a few comments in the chat area that Brian uses 446.5, and Dwayne said that 443 to 435 and 445 to 447 are hotspot frequencies. So I guess Dennis can pick whatever frequency he wants and see who complains, unless you want to bring your spectrum analyzer out.
Well, one of the things is ham's the spirit of ham radio is to use the lowest power, and still be able to communicate. So I've turned down the power on all my hotspots to the point where I can still communicate from the house to the barn and around the yard and, short ways into the neighborhood. Other than the 145.5625, which Yaesu is trying to promote as a simplex frequency, my PDN node is set up on 147.525. That seemed to be a clear frequency. It's one of the simplex frequencies.
So this is what I was talking about. This is the repeater that we built, me and Jim together. The WRIT repeater. Picture of that.
On the hotspots, on the reflector, especially YSF, there's something called an echo test. D-Star says it's a D-Star and DMR have echo test as well. One of the things I get a lot is Yaesu Fusion sounds lousy. The audio quality is lousy. One of the issues is the microphone gain adjustment. If they sound distorted or lousy on Fusion, most likely the microphone gain is set too high. You have to set it lower. I have mine set a little bit less than mid-range. The issue is that with these radios, how you sound, and it varies upon your voice, how close I talk across the microphone about an inch away. Your audio is going to come out different on FM versus digital. So if you set it up for FM, you might be overmodulating on digital. I wish, and I think Yaesu may change this, but it's the same setting for analog and digital in the radio setup. But please, please, please do an echo test. You can do it on the air, but I hear so many times, I can listen to America Link or one of the other reflectors, and I keep hearing radio test all day long. And yeah, your audio sounds good, or no, it's distorted. But you can do it yourself. You don't need to get on a reflector to do that. And I've got an example. If we have time, I can show that. Okay, digital nets. There's a couple of them here. Paste in here. The screenshot comes from hamroperator.com, and this changes, so go there. This is where I get a lot of information. A lot of these are technical nets, and if you have a question, you can ask it. What's not shown here is the MinWiz technical net. I show it up here, and that's on WiresX Room 21439. It's also on a YSF reflector. As I said, the fellows there have done a great job of bridging that to the YSF, so there's very, very little problems. So if you only have a hotspot, you can't get into a repeater, can't get into WiresX, connect your hotspot to this WiresF reflector. And the YSF number, 5-digit number, it happens to be the same. They set it up to be the same as the WiresX number as well. And there's a lot of people that are doing that. People that are bridging between WiresX and YSF, there was an issue if the number was different. America Link at one time, they've got bridges. Their YSF number was different. That caused some issues. They now made the YSF and their WiresX number 21080 the same, and that's helped quite a bit. So these are things that people learn. One of the things I want to mention quickly on the Yaesu radios is that there's a lot of other features besides digital. You can receive the FM broadcast band and the aircraft band, the AM aircraft band. There's an extended receive on them all the way from 108, I think, up to 900 megahertz. There's a spectrum mode, power off. On the FT3, you can do audio recording, text messaging via APRS with your radio, especially the 400, which has a nice, big, bright color touchscreen. The radios are in, have a GPS. The new handhelds and the new 300 have Bluetooth built in, but you can get Bluetooth and a voice module board for the FTM 100. You can plug that in there. Group monitor, I mentioned that before. What is group monitor or GM? You set your radio up in group monitor, and it sort of operates like ARTS, the automatic range transponder system, where I set it up in group monitor, and every 15 or 20 seconds, it sends out a transmission. And what it's doing is saying, here I am. Is anybody else within range? And if there's another radio with GM on, all the radios within range of each other with GM on, their call signs will show up, the signal strength shows up. So if I see a station in GM mode, I may not have heard or whatever, I know that I can go over to the simplex and make a contact communication with them. You can use this over repeaters as well, but it's discouraged because what's happening is that, as I said, every 15 or 20 seconds, it sends out a birch. Can you imagine, more than a handful of people, 5 or 10 people, all on a repeater frequency, all sending out random bursts of digital information? And one thing I forgot to put on this slide is memory banks. One of the unique things about the Yaesu handhelds is that they have memory banks, so you can set up for unique scanning. So you want to just monitor the 2 meter frequencies or 70 centimeter frequencies. You put them in banks and set it up. And they have a lot of memory channels. On the FD70, the introductory radio, there's over 1,000 memory banks there.
Steve?
Yes.
One person, Parth had asked, and I think he may have exited already, that do you have a slide of features versus radios, or could that be developed so that they know, for the price range, what features they're getting?
Yes. I'm not aware of anything. I did see some presentations by other clubs, but they're like 2 or 3 years old, so they're not up to date.
Okay.
I just go to the manual, I went to the ham radio site earlier today and looked at the FD70, and right on that site is a 2-page thing that says radio features. And if you go to a different radio, they'll have, radio features there as well. I'd be happy to, separately have a conversation with somebody over what, since I have them all except the 991 and I've operated them quite a bit, I might be, somewhat helpful in knowing, what features are available on some versus other radios.
Okay, thank you. And one other thing, kind of off top, or you mentioned banks, came up just this past week with just a Yaesu FM radio that has multiple banks, and the person that has it says he had difficulty using chirp when he was programming that. He could program memories channels, but not banks. So be careful using chirp with some of the Yaesu radios.
Yeah, good point. As I mentioned, even if the radio is on the chirp website and says it works, all the features and things may not be available in chirp. Okay, this is a slide on DGID and DPID. This is, you'll often see Fusion 2. First, Yaesu came out with Fusion, then they came out with Fusion 2. What's Fusion 2? Well, it adds this DGID and DPID to the mix here. And you can sort of think of it like, the tones for analog. You have NAC for P25, color codes for DMR, and RAND for NXDN. The good thing here, if you read through the slide down at the bottom, is that most repeaters and systems use 00. So if you have your radio set up 00, you're going to communicate with just about everybody. The only time you want to maybe put in something different here is if you want to communicate with your buddy. he can have it set up to 0-1. You can set your radio up to 0-1. You're not going to hear any of the repeater traffic going through, but when he transmits, you're going to be able to hear him.
Right, Steve.
Yes.
Brian Toruk has got a question about can you log all the hams that are using your repeater or WireX? Is there a way to log who uses it?
Yes, there is. And if I got some time at the end, I can pull up my screen, get rid of this PowerPoint slide here and pull up the screen, and I can show you a little bit about that. But yeah, you can go to mobile users. There's a log file that you can set up. I'm losing my voice here, so I just put a cough drop in. You can, I log so I know, who's in, who's out, that kind of thing. And while I'm thinking of it, the previous slide there, the unique ID with each radio, just think how handy this would be. I know there's been some issues with jamming on some nets and stuff like this, and who is this? And I know there's radio direction finding, so eventually they'll get caught. But just imagine if somebody, maybe not only jamming, but something else, their radio transmits a unique ID only to that radio. So you can then identify who that is by the radio, and it's something unique. And also, if you want repeater control and you don't want anybody else trying to guess your DTMF tones or something like that, or trying to guess your passwords to change your repeater power or whatever, register your radio to the repeater, and it's a unique ID that nobody else has. Okay, on this slide, I'm talking about some etiquette, and I've seen etiquette talked about a lot here, but I mentioned mic gain. Check out your mic gain, because Yaesu Fusion does sound good. I like it. Some of the operating, it's different than FM because it's going over networks, and networks have to set themselves up. Leave a gap between transmissions because of latency in the internet. You may be at your location and you heard the fellow just finished his transmission, but somebody located in another part of the country may still be getting 1 or 2 seconds of the transmission coming through to him. So in practice, I always push the PTT. I wait a second before talking, and then when I'm done talking, I wait another second or two and then release the PTT. So any digital mode, this is good practice. And I hear a lot of people give both call signs at the beginning and the end of their 1 or 2 minute QSO. You don't have to do that. Your call sign goes out. If they've got bridging, your call sign may not make it from the Fusion or C4 FM bridge over to the DMR bridge. So it's always good to, within the FCC rules, to just say your call sign, but don't do it at the beginning and end in both call signs. And here's something else, and I know people operating DMR. I listen to DMR, radio pops on, and everybody's doing a quick key. They're doing it to change talk group, or to just they want to see their call sign pop up on their Pi-Star dashboard. So all day long, it's quick key. With Fusion, you don't have to quick key. Use WiresX for control to find out if a repeater is connected or even has WiresX on it. And then from that control, you can change rooms. And as Steve Jobs says, wait, there's more. And this is some of the expandability and flexibility. IMRS, Internet Linked Multiple Repeater Site. There's a board that goes in the repeaters. In California, it has extensive networks. Over the internet, you can connect repeaters with this board. And each repeater can be set up with a different DGID. So if I want to talk to repeater A to repeater B, I use DGID of 10. And these repeaters won't hear them. If I want to go, have these two repeaters talk to each other, use a different DGID. And then if I want everybody to hear everything, then I can have the repeaters and the radios set up with DGID 50. So sort of like, you can create your own hybrid network. This may be, why it's maybe a little bit confusing, because there's lots you can do with it. And I've got a lot of links here. I want to emphasize the official Yaesu website. They've got something called the YES, Y-E-S, Yaesu Education System. If you want to learn more about WiresX, John Crook has a 3-part series, everything you want to know about WiresX, but we're afraid to ask. They're about an hour in length, but they're worth going through. I want to highlight the Southern Tier Fusion System Network Facebook page. There's good documents there. Yaesu also has a Facebook, and there's unofficial Facebook pages. There's Facebook pages, I think, for each radio. Ham Operator, great site. I've mentioned that before. There's a fella down here, amateurradionotes.com. He has a lot on the digital modes, not so much on Fusion, but he has an awful lot on Hotspots, especially Pi-Star. And he updates his stuff several times a month. Very good information there. John Crook has done 10, 15-minute audio clips on SoundCloud. What is Fusion? How do I use Fusion? What is WiresX? So there's lots of information. Thanks to these people. Again, I mentioned them at the beginning. I thought I had moved this slide to the beginning, but here it is at the end. And I have a few minutes left. I'll take some questions, but I wanted to show some of the things in the browser here. And if I go to the OpenSpot, Mike, you had a question on the OpenSpot. I usually do a quick setup from the screen. I go to quick setup. Tells you what radio do you want to use. You know, if I have, okay, I want a C4 FM, which is the Yaesu System Fusion. Click that. And then, all right, what do I want to operate? If I want to operate Fusion to Fusion, I would select FCS or YSF. But if I want to do the cross mode, I can select any of these other rooms as well. And we were talking about frequencies before. I use frequencies from 431 all the way up to 446.650. So yeah, YSF, click on that reflector. Go to it. The nice thing about the OpenSpot 3 is that you can just unplug it. You power it up and it's almost instantaneous, whereas Raspberry Pi, you should do a shutdown. They run their software out of RAM, so the chance of corrupting the SD card is slim, but it's still a possibility. And sometimes it takes, you know, with the slower Raspberry Pis, it takes a minute or two for it to come up, but OpenSpot is instantaneous. Here I can select, all right, what room reflector that I want to, and here's all the list, and this is updated frequently. There's lots of them. So as an example, I use the YSF Colorado, click connect. And the OpenSpot is also transmitting. It's saying it's connected. It'll give me voice messages that it's connected to my YSF network. Another cool feature here, I don't think anybody's talking at the moment, but this is something they added with the latest version of firmware. When I bought this back in January, the firmware was, I think, version 2 or 3. They're up to version 20. And the cool thing is they keep adding new features. Here's one they recently added with version 20, is that I can hear through the browser people that are, you know, audio playback enabled. So I don't have to have my radio or anything, but I can hear from my browser conversation going on. So that's pretty cool. The YSF reflectors, there's a website available here. Anybody can set up a YSF reflector. I've got one set up for the XRX Club. What are some popular ones? I go over to count, and there's America Link. Wow, on YSF, there's 463 connected. And you can see, well, they bridge to the WiresX room, and they also have a bridge to Brandmaster Talk Group 31656. And you can go down here, and since it's sorted by users, you know, pick a popular one. If you want to hear a conversation, pick a popular one. And the FCS reflectors also, wow, they've added a few here. I don't know what these are, 222, 224, but you can see, all right, who's last heard kind of thing. I can look at all right, I want to look at FCS 02, who's on, what's going on there, all kinds of stuff. Here's the Facebook page for the Southern Tier System Network, Fusion Network. And these are the documents that I was referring to. Bill has these documents set up. So if you want to know more about, you know, how do I use WiresX, PDN, how do I set up my radio, how do I do a firmware update, you can go there. I don't think I have anything else to show in the browser, so I'm going to minimize this and quickly go over to my WiresX repeater. Maybe I should stop sharing. Are there any questions while I'm doing this? I use VNC. Right now I'm on my Mac computer, but with this screen, I assume you can see the screen here. It's showing the WiresX software set up on the computer. My repeater actually that's connected. Oh, Bill, there's a, look at that. There's a socket communication timeout. That's an internet issue, I believe. But it's connected to Bill's room down in the southern tier. And Bill, if you wanted to just key up there, I can show people, you know, what happens when you key up, if Bill's still on. If he isn't, oh, there he is. Yeah, I heard you come over, Bill. Thank you very much for that. You see Bill transmitted. I don't know if you can hear that through my headset, but he transmitted. He's on an FD1D. Thanks, Bill. So I can, let me turn down the radio. Hi, John. I can connect or disconnect from the software. I set it up with this this screen here. I can go to the transceiver and set up everything. So there's a lot to do here with the software. That's another presentation in and of itself. So close it out. Stop my screen sharing here for a minute. I'm going to be using my radio to connect to my Pi-Star hotspot, and it's connected to the YSF Parrot reflector. So I'll now key the radio. This is KA1CNF testing Parrot. KA1CNF 1234 4321. KA1CNF. This is KA1CNF testing Parrot. KA1CNF 1234 4321. KA1CNF. Okay, demonstration of Parrot. I have, Tim, we're running short of time. I have two other videos that I guess I won't show, but I can make them available somehow. Maybe my Google Drive share, I can do that, but it shows using WiresX to connect to both a repeater, using the WiresX 200 box hardware, and using WiresX to connect to your Pi-Star hotspot or OpenSpot hotspot.
All right, can you put those links or give those a link to those to Scott, and he can post those possibly on the website also?
Yes, okay, I've stopped sharing my screen. Unfortunately, I lost the chat window, so did I, any questions before Tim makes his announcements?
I don't see any hands up or anything in the chat room.
I'm good on QRZ, so if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. Thank you very much for your attention and your patience and your participation in this Zoom meeting.
Steve, thank you very much for sharing your extensive knowledge, and more than most of us have here. So, and thank you for being a resource to those that have Fusion, and thank you to Mike Moore and Rich Harfoff for their work on the other digital programs that we've had. See the RaRa website, rochesterham.org, for the links to the videos.